Hello everyone, this is going to be a new addition to our political science class where I will be able to give periodically some lectures on where we're at and hopefully be able to bring more life to the topic. Now, we have already gone over the introduction and our intros to ourselves, and so I hope that you have all gotten to know each other. I actually, obviously you can see I'm not on campus. I am actually at my office for my own personal company. Uh, but we should be able to get more into, political science. Now, I think that this is a really great time to take a political science class, at least for the next year, because we are actually getting involved in a political campaign. And Wednesday which is September, I think 16th, is going to be the first time that we're going to have a political, campaign. No, I'm sorry, it's the second Republican political debate. So that should be a pretty, interesting debate. Some of you may be interested in watching it, and I hope you do. I'm not a big person to watch debates. I find it a little bit boring. I watch more of the commentary on the debates. But anyway, this leads us into regards to Module 1, Module 2, but before I get to that, I do want you to remember that there isn't technically a book for this class, and I did that on purpose, and I know that's a little controversial. One, the book is extremely expensive. I haven't found a good, cheap political science book. And a lot of people I know, unfortunately, even though I'm passionate about it, but I know there's a lot of people who don't find that same passion. But some people feel a little bit frustrated because they prefer a textbook as to something that can be referenced. Your quizzes is going to be based mostly on lecture, so that's a bit of a positive. And some of the modules, and I've updated the test so that it could be more geared towards that. Some of you are asking for answers, and you're not going to get an answer because I'm afraid that you may actually share the answer to something to another person, which I know that has happened not just in my class but in other political science classes on this campus. So I'm not pretty big on sharing the answers, especially until after the quiz is closed. Okay, now that we've gotten all that other stuff taken care of, let's get into Module 1, which is uh, dealing with, the political foundation and federalism. Now, America is based on a constitutional democracy. And we say this because a democracy is not just for the people, by the people, but it's also based on an actual constitution, a document, a governing document that allows us to ensure laws, right? So, and then also when you pair this also with a true democracy is not what we have, there's different types of democracies. So not only are we a constitutional democracy, we're also a republican democracy, because a republican democracy means that we are actually vote for our representatives. So we have some say in how we are governed based on who we actually vote. Okay, so federalism is just really a relationship between various governments and how we actually govern. So it becomes a really interesting tug of war, because you'll have some people who are extremely attached to the state, right? So the state should have more supreme power than the actual government, than the actual federal central government. Whereas those who feel that the federal government should have more strength tends to do that as well. They think that the states will have lesser power. So there's a shared relationship of power amongst the central government and the state government, and then eventually you also look at cities, local municipalities, which also include counties. This really comes up really around some of the more hot button issues, such as money, right? So, who should be responsible for building what? Who should be responsible for taking what aspect of the citizen? It's funny where states really want autonomy, but then they don't really want to pay for autonomy because it costs money to be a place, essentially a state without a country. So, but there have been some other topics and that used to be just primarily a federal issue, and that would be one, immigration, right? So immigration is truly tied to the federal government, who can determine what a citizen is and who is not a citizen. And so, as of right now, we're in hot debate over the 14th Amendment, and is really the 14th Amendment being abused? The 14th Amendment historically came out of slavery, and you wanted to find a way to universally make slaves to be continual citizens within the country. And how did you do that? Is you passed an amendment that would ensure that if they were born on America's soil, that instantly you become a citizen. Yeah, but no one had the long-term implications, which would be for people who immigrated here. Uh, should a person who immigrated here with the primary goal of their child be a citizen, should that be fair? Is that fraud? These are some really interesting questions. And then what do you do for people who are not a citizen to come here and whether illegally and have a kid? Like, this becomes a bit of an issue, even though 40% of our illegal immigrants are on student visas, expired visas, so they got here somehow, but they don't necessarily follow the law, and so they stay here longer than what they're supposed to. So essentially, how does the federal government get the states to do something that they really, really want them to do? Is through grants. So there's a money attachment to the new rule, and that's really how you get the federal government to persuade the states to do what they want. Which leads us to when this shared powers and this checks and balances, so that we can, and federalism has this notion of shared checks and balances, and this shared responsibility of governing amongst the various branches. And so there's three main branches that are mentioned in the Constitution. This is moving on into Module 2 if you haven't noticed, which is Congress, the President, and the judiciary. Right, so Congress is in Article 1 of the Constitution, and why is that important? You got to think that our forefathers, the writers of the Constitution, was really concerned about our institution working very slowly so that laws don't get changed very quickly. And they also were concerned about the organization of the Constitution itself. And so it was not unintentional that Article 1 would the very first amendment, right? So that's something to consider. And because Article 1 and Congress was the very first one, that was important because essentially our government is built by the people for the people, and Congress, in a sense, represents the people. Of course, over time, and we can pinpoint this under the Jacksonian era, where he believed that he was the first people's president, and so we did have over a time where the president has become the forefront of what all Americans are supposed to believe. So we essentially should support the presidency, maybe not the president himself, him or herself. But before then, your congressional leader used to be, and I guess in some instances still is, the person that you should go to in regards to getting what you would like to see happen within your district and essentially within the country. Uh, you know, and there's a lot of pinpoint issues. It's interesting because we like to think that Congress should do exactly what the people in their district should want. But the problem is that they also still have to think about the federal implications. So what are the long-term implications of some of their decision making? I mean, let's look at the Iran deal. I think part of the problem with the Iran deal is that this is probably part of the problem with foreign affairs as a whole, which we'll talk about, much later in another video, hopefully, is that our main issue is it happens over there. In America, and a lot of scholars have even mentioned this, is that America is uniquely located. We're located to where most Americans don't travel outside of the country. It's kind of expensive. And so then that also makes us most likely to not know where other countries are. We also are unlikely to actually know. We're bad on geography. We're bad when it comes to international travel. And we tend to not know multiple languages, right? So, because we don't have that great of interaction with people who know multiple languages. We may, I guess, of course, this depends on the circle you run in and, all these other different things. But as integrated as we are not, we still do have this soup, if you can say, or a salad bowl. I don't know when you were raised or when you went to school. When I was in school, we were taught we were a salad bowl, but now we're soup. I don't know, whichever. But I say this because we do have some semblance of America's culture is a mix of other people's culture, right? So, but if you travel abroad, Italy is different from Greece, and Egypt is different from Iraq, and Kuwait is different from, the UAE. Russia is different from Germany, and all these different things. So, but America, that's, not the case. And because of this, it puts us in a unique situation to where who does this Iran deal really affect? It's hard to have this connection between if the Iran deal is going to affect me or you in our everyday life, because one, I'm not a Jew, and most of you may or may not be, most of you are probably not Jewish. That's an assumption, which, that could be bad. But because most of us are not Jewish and there's only a few of us, that's a problem. That becomes a bit of an issue to try to relate this to the topic. Another issue we have is that the doomsday. We've been having the doomsday with Iran for a while. And so we definitely want to say that I'm not saying that that the doomsday doesn't happen and that there's a possibility that it may not happen. It's, yeah, maybe. But we're being told that Iran getting a nuclear bomb is a bad thing, which, like I said, it could be a bad thing. It also could be a good thing. I don't know. But because of this question mark, and because it doesn't necessarily affect us in the same way as, I don't know, Mexico having a nuclear weapon, or someone that's pretty darn close to proximity of America, it becomes a bit of a You're over there, we're over here. So how do you get Americans to care if you're not a Jew? And that becomes a problem with stuff like this. So, the likelihood of people writing Congress, their congressional leader, to try to get them to not vote on it, is probably not likely. You're more likely to, if you're going to write a congressional leader, to talk about jobs, student loans, something that's probably more pertinent to you. But Congress, when you're reading into Congress and looking at your lecture notes and your PowerPoint and all of the additional material that I did give for Congress, I do want you to focus on the various branches, the two branches, the Senate and the House, and look at the relationship that they interact with each other, but also look at the unique differences of the Senate than the House of Reps. And that unique difference of the Senate is really kind of important because it makes them a bit more powerful than the House. And, it's 100 of them, so they tend to have much more clout and influence than the House does because there's so many more of them. There's, 4 times as many people. And then you look at the presidency, which is one of my favorite topics by far. And part of the presidency is a little difficult to study because there's only a few people who study them because you don't have that much access to them, and you also don't have that many of them to cover. So, I've done some studies on the rhetoric, which I think is really fascinating. And I think that the rhetoric becomes really important. Now, can the rhetoric, a presidential rhetoric, be so important that it can make economic or domestic changes drastic, in a drastic way? And the answer is yes and no, depending on the topic. It's hard to imagine a time that the president didn't give speeches. And for many years during the founding, the president really didn't give speeches. They would prefer to write a letter to talk to Congress. And then it wasn't until Wilson that he became much more interested in the power of speech, which makes sense because we were at war in World War I, and it was a big war, right? It was the war that ended all wars, i.e. But the power of speech became a bit interesting, and the presidents even before then had this big debate, have had debates back and forth about what would be more important, speaking, not speaking. But we can even look at Abraham Lincoln when he does give the few speeches that he does give. The Gettysburg Address, for example, became a very infamous speech. Short, but it helped fuel the fight and rally the troops. So does presidential rhetoric, maybe, is it important? Maybe part of it is it doesn't happen that often, which made it much more important when you did have rhetoric. That's a possibility. Maybe at this particular time in our life, we're oversaturated with the president's rhetoric. You talk too much. So I'll start tuning out because you talk too much. And we're in a 24-hour cycle. So how often do you hear our current president speaking? I mean, it seems like every week there's something that's coming out in regards to a talk. And that's boring, to be frankly. Who keeps up with what he says? And does it have that much of an influence as in 100 years ago, the president barely spoke. They spoke when they needed to really talk. when an amendment was passing, or when we were at war, or when, different things like that. That's when we actually heard these people speak. Now, we keep hearing these people talk and talk and talk. So, what's the difference between this talk and the next talk would be, I guess, preempting television. I mean, I really am not too sure when I'm supposed to be taking this seriously. And maybe sometimes you don't take it seriously until it hits and affects you in a way. So, like the economic crisis, did we take Bush seriously? Maybe not. But what you did begin to start taking him seriously is when, the banks were closing. And you began to see the effects of what he was actually talking about. So, I mean, but news stats described how the biggest power that the president actually has is the power to persuade. And much of this persuasion is oral, it's not written. And when you talk, how you talk, all becomes really important. So maybe some people should take this particular lesson. But the presidency has its own powers, and you really, as you read through the presidency, the lecture notes, look at the clauses, look at where his power comes from, look at how his power has grown over time through simply interpretation of the Constitution. So the Constitution, according to his powers, haven't changed besides the fact that he can only run for 2 terms. That's the only change that we've had about the presidency and its power and its election process we've ever had. We've had 2 changes. One, we have attached the popular election to the actual electoral college. And then the second is that we've had that you can only run twice. But other than that, no other changes have been made to the presidency since it was founded. So that's pretty surprising because we've made changes to Congress all the time. But what is the next astounding thing is, if that's the case, if the Constitution hasn't really been changed, then how has the presidential power grown over time? And this has grown simply through interpretation of the Constitution. So some presidents have restricted their power, and some of them have grown their power. And then also Congress have stepped in to try to increase and decrease power. One of them is with the War Powers Act of 1973. And then we've also have, most recently under the Bush era, with Rumsfeld, we've had some of the decrease of power in regards to torture, which we have never had a Supreme Court made a ruling against a presidential decision, such as the right to torture, the right of habeas corpus, while America has been at war. So this is the very first time we've had the Supreme Court rule against the president in times of a declared war. So it's pretty significant. Usually the Supreme Court waits until after the war is over to rule against what the president did. And I guess they felt that this was too pressing. And, up to this, even though it's something else to look at, even though the Supreme Court has ruled that terrorists do have the rights to habeas corpus, that torture is not legal, America has still only prosecuted 1 terrorist. So we And of course, as we've been told, torture is not legal, but America's not necessarily torturing on America's soil, right? So we're toward, and I'll leave it at that. So, sorry, I'm working. Okay, anyway. So if you could, this will be the end of the first video, and I'm hoping that I can get to another video within the next couple weeks when we deal with the federal bureaucracy, because the next Module 2 and Module 3 that just opened up this week is dealing with the president, and still dealing with the president and how the president's governing and the organizational chart, so you can see how big government really is. I mean, government is over 1.4 million employees. That's pretty darn big. So, and with a government that big, the president is supposed to be governing all of them. Okay? And I will see you. I will hopefully see you soon. I'm looking forward to your feedback. Is there something I should continue to keep doing? If there's something I shouldn't continue to keep doing, let me know. Some of you have been asking me, where should we talk? I usually talk on Sundays. So, but if you email me, I talk. I sometimes show up in the chat room, but I definitely get online and answer everything on Sundays and do postings and stuff like that. I'm really enjoying some of your comments in your AIDS videos, so that's really, really, really good. Okay, so look forward to hearing from you guys soon, and have a great day.